In the Burro Mountains of New Mexico, Tom and Linda Bosworth drove into the backcountry expecting a short off-road outing and a picnic before heading home. They were in their late 60s, married for decades, and used to doing hard things together. Then the Jeep rolled, the signal disappeared, and the heat began to strip away every easy assumption. What followed was no longer a drive in the mountains, but a fight to find water, keep moving, and keep each other alive. By the time Tom and Linda Bosworth left the pavement and began climbing into the Burro Mountains of southwestern New Mexico, the day had already acquired the deceptive perfection that often precedes disaster. The sky was hard and blue. Sunlight flashed across the hood of the Jeep Tom had rebuilt with his own hands. The machine rattled over stones and dry ruts, carrying the retired couple farther into the Gila National Forest, away from traffic, houses, and the ordinary safeguards of civilization. Tom was 68, a Vietnam veteran, a lifelong car man, and an amateur racer who trusted machinery because he understood it. Linda, 67, had trusted Tom for more than 3 decades. They had met on a ski trip in Aspen in the 1970s, married, and built a life around shared adventures. This drive was supposed to be another one, a picnic, a test run, a few hours in the backcountry before returning home. They had stopped for fuel on the way. Linda called her sister and mentioned that they were going off-road, but she did not say exactly where. Tom told no one. In the freezer at home, Linda had noticed a large jug of frozen water. For a moment she considered bringing it. Then she decided they already had enough. That small decision would return to her again and again. The Jeep performed well on the established trail, and the rougher the road became, the more pleased Tom seemed. Branches scraped the sides. The tires climbed over rock shelves and dropped into gullies. Linda laughed as the vehicle pitched and bounced. After lunch, they pushed deeper into the mountains, leaving the more traveled route for a narrower track that would give Tom a better sense of what the rebuilt Jeep could do. The trail tilted. The ground fell away on one side. The Jeep lurched, lost balance, and rolled. Inside the tumbling vehicle there was no steering, no braking, no useful action at all. The world became metal, dust, glass, and gravity. When the Jeep finally stopped on its side, Tom found himself braced against the interior, looking upward at Linda, who was still caught in her seatbelt. "Are you all right?" She said she was. Neither had suffered a major injury. That was the first miracle. But Tom knew the vehicle might still burn. Fuel could be leaking. A damaged wire could spark. He climbed over the steering column and pushed himself out, then reached back for Linda. She was frightened and tangled, but he pulled her free and guided her away from the Jeep. They stood in the heat and looked at the overturned machine. It had carried them into the wilderness, and now it had become a dead weight lying among the trees. Tom tried to right it. He attached a ratchet strap to a small tree and worked the mechanism until the line tightened. The Jeep shifted slightly, enough to suggest that it might roll back onto its wheels, but the tree was too small and the angle too severe. He strained against the ratchet, wasting strength in the afternoon heat, until the truth became unavoidable. The Jeep was not moving. Their cell phones showed no signal. Mountain ridges blocked the towers. There were no houses, no engines, no distant voices, and no reason to expect another traveler. They checked their water. The 2 bottles brought for lunch were nearly empty. The temperature was climbing toward 100 degrees. They knew the standard survival advice: stay with the vehicle. A wreck was easier to see from the air than 2 people walking through scrub. But nobody knew where they were, and no search would begin until someone realized they were missing. Even then, the search area would be enormous. Waiting beside the Jeep without water could mean death before help came. Tom studied his imperfect map. Somewhere below them was the Gila River. If they descended, they might reach the water, cross it, and find a highway on the other side. It was a gamble, but the presence of a river seemed more certain than the arrival of rescuers. Before leaving, Tom took a .357 Magnum and ammunition from the Jeep. He had carried the pistol because the mountains held bears and mountain lions. Then he and Linda started downhill. At first, movement itself felt like progress, but the afternoon sun pressed against them, and the trail narrowed along steep ground. Brush caught their clothing. Loose stones rolled beneath their feet. In places, the slope dropped sharply beside them. Every step demanded concentration, and concentration consumed energy they could not replace. Linda cut her leg on the way down. The wound was deep enough to bleed heavily, and in a landscape inhabited by predators, blood carried another kind of danger. They treated it as best they could and continued. The light was already beginning to change. If they could reach the river before dark, they believed they might still escape. After several hours, they heard water. The sound lifted them. In a dry country, running water can seem like a promise. But when they emerged from the brush, they found not an easy crossing, but a fast, swollen torrent confined by cliffs. The current was too strong, the banks too steep, and there was no safe route to the highway. Their plan ended at the river's edge. Still, the river gave them what the overturned jeep could not: water. Tom filled their containers and drank. Linda refused. She feared Giardia, the parasite that can live in water contaminated by animal waste. Under normal conditions, the concern would have been reasonable. In that place, in that heat, it was a deadly calculation. Giardia might make her sick later. Dehydration could kill her within days. Tom argued that they had no choice. Linda remained afraid of the water. She drank little or none. Dusk gathered around the river. Tracks marked the mud, but they were not human tracks. The cut on Linda's leg still carried the smell of blood. The couple knew animals used the river as a corridor and watering place. Tom had the pistol, but a handgun did not make the darkness safe, and he could not remain alert all night after the climb down. They decided to return to the jeep. The route back was in 5 miles ascent through darkness and exhaustion. The same slope that had punished their knees on the way down now demanded everything from their lungs and legs. They climbed for more than 4 hours. By the time they reached the wreck, neither had enough strength left to discuss whether the decision had been wise. The overturned jeep offered shelter, but only one of them could stretch out inside. They slept badly, surrounded by metal, dust, and the knowledge that they had spent an entire day and gained nothing. During the night, Tom began to understand the full weight of what had happened. He had bought the jeep. He had rebuilt it. He had driven them away from the main trail. Linda had gone because she trusted him. Now she was lying beside an overturned vehicle in a remote forest with almost no safe water. At dawn, he chose the only option that remained. They would hike back toward the highway, roughly 30 kilometers away and mostly uphill. Before leaving, Linda wrote a note and attached it to the jeep. She included their ages and explained that they were out of food and water. If someone happened upon the wreck, the note might turn an abandoned vehicle into a rescue signal. They began walking before the worst heat arrived, but the desert summer quickly overtook them. The air grew thick and punishing. Their mouths dried. Sweat carried water and salt out of their bodies faster than they could replace either. The river water in Tom's container became their only reserve. Linda still resisted drinking it. At one point, she took a small amount into her mouth, wet her tongue, and spat it out. Tom watched the water fall to the ground and understood that fear was now working against them as powerfully as the heat. Hours passed. Their steps shortened. The trail offered little shade. A large bird circled overhead, and the sight of it seemed less symbolic than practical. In this country, death was quickly noticed. They rested, rose, and walked again. Then Tom spotted a prickly pear cactus. Its fruit held moisture, and for a moment the discovery felt like salvation. They ate. The pulp gave them a brief surge of energy. Their pace quickened. They even joked. The relief did not last. Tom's stomach cramped, and severe diarrhea followed. The cactus had taken more water from his body than it had given. He was already dehydrated. Now he was losing fluid he could not spare. When the sickness passed, he looked diminished, as though some essential structure inside him had collapsed. They began drinking their own urine. The act was not heroic, and it was not useful for long. As dehydration worsens, urine becomes increasingly concentrated with salt and waste, forcing the kidneys to work harder. But to Tom and Linda, desperate and nearly empty, it seemed like a way to recover something that would otherwise be lost. They swallowed because the alternative was to continue drying out. At some point, they saw 2 figures on a ridge. The colors of the shirts stood out against the earth. Tom and Linda shouted. They screamed that they were dying. Tom fired the pistol to attract attention. The figures did not come. Whether the people failed to understand, could not locate them, or chose not to respond, Tom and Linda never knew. The sight of possible rescue disappearing across the ridge was more damaging than seeing no one at all. For a few minutes, salvation had possessed a human shape. Then it walked away. By evening, dehydration was changing their minds as well as their bodies. Tom's judgment slowed. Direction became uncertain. The map no longer seemed to match the land. Linda could barely continue. She collapsed, and they spent a second night in the open, too exhausted to do more than lie down. The next day, Linda's condition worsened rapidly. She had gone more than 24 hours without meaningful water. Her gait became uneven. She leaned heavily on a stick. Each step produced severe pain in her back, a warning that her kidneys were failing under the strain of dehydration. Tom tried to keep them moving. He recognized parts of the terrain and remembered a ranch marked near the Saddle Rock area. If they could reach it, there might be people, livestock tanks, or a working well. He led them downhill, hoping the map and his memory were correct. Then he saw green grass. In the sunburned landscape, the color was startling. The soil beneath it felt damp. Nearby stood a wellhead, probably used to supply water for cattle. Tom examined the equipment, certain that water lay only meters below. But the mechanism gave him no access. There was no handle he could operate, no open tank, no pipe he could break without tools. They had reached water they could not touch. It was one of the cruelest moments of the ordeal. Their bodies needed only a few liters. The earth beneath them held far more than that. Yet the distance between having water and merely standing above it was absolute. By then, roughly 72 hours had passed since the jeep rolled. Linda fell farther behind. Tom would walk, turn, and see her standing at a distance, motionless, both hands resting on the stick. Eventually, she sat down and said she could not continue. The pain was too great. Her strength was gone. Then she told him to leave her. Tom refused. Linda insisted. If he stayed, 2 people might die. If he went alone, he might find help, and help might return in time. They had been married 32 years. They had shared mountains, roads, homes, arguments, and ordinary mornings. Now survival required them to separate. Linda told him they had had a wonderful marriage. She told him to go. Tom walked away from her carrying the pistol, the map, and the responsibility of reaching another human being before her organs failed. For a while, fear kept him moving. Then his body shut down. He collapsed face first into the sand and lost consciousness. When he woke, a night had passed. Sand filled his nose and covered his face. The lost hours terrified him. Linda had been alone through the darkness, too weak to move, while he lay unconscious somewhere ahead of her. He staggered on. By the 4th day, Tom could no longer walk a straight line. He felt drunk. His thoughts broke apart before he could finish them. The discipline that had carried him through Vietnam and a lifetime of difficult work no longer controlled his failing body. He believed he had reached his final day. He dropped to his knees and prayed aloud. He asked not only for his own life but for Linda's, even though he did not know whether she was still alive. Then he heard a helicopter. At first, the aircraft seemed to be moving away. Tom forced himself upright, raised the revolver, and fired 3 shots. The sound cut through the empty air. A medic in the helicopter saw him and waved. The rescue had begun because 2 hikers found the note attached to the overturned jeep. They alerted authorities, and search crews followed the trail Tom and Linda had left through the mountains. The note, written before the long hike, had done exactly what Linda hoped it might do. Tom directed the crew toward the place where he had left her. He had no way to know what they would find. 10 minutes later, the helicopter reached Linda. She was alive. Hospital treatment saved her, but survival did not mean recovery without cost. The dehydration caused catastrophic damage to her intestines, leaving her dependent on intravenous nutrition. Tom carried guilt long after the rescue, replaying the decision to take the jeep deeper into the wilderness, the failure to tell anyone their route, and the water left behind in the freezer. Their ordeal was not caused by a single dramatic mistake. It was built from ordinary choices: an unshared destination, too little water, a rough trail, a river that could not be crossed, fear of contaminated water, and the belief that the next ridge might finally reveal safety. Each decision narrowed the margin until survival depended on a handwritten note, 3 gunshots, and a helicopter appearing at the edge of consciousness. Tom and Linda entered the Burrow Mountains expecting a picnic and a test drive. 4 days later, they emerged as evidence of how quickly confidence can be stripped away in a hostile landscape, and how stubbornly two people can fight when the only thing stronger than the wilderness is the refusal to let the other die. If this extreme survival story kept you watching, like the video and subscribe to Extreme Survival Stories for more true accounts of ordinary people pushed beyond their limits.